You're a very credible person and knowledgeable person and scholarly person with this subject material, but you also are a person that puts the rubber to the road and practice and are involved in many traditions.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the kind words, and I'm glad that you can empathize with the fact that, so much of the literature that in particular we've been able to wean ourselves on over the last, 20 years, 30 years. There is this kind of, I don't know, foreplay, this kind of I don't know if it's just wanting to persist in that space of vagary, or if it's a sort of a sly disguise for perhaps a lack of total integration, total understanding. But when you write a book and you put your stuff out there, you're effectively, whether you will admit it or not, you are positing yourself as an expert and as a teacher. And I think it's a teacher's duty to be as specific as possible about a lot of this stuff. And that also comes from my training in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. That's the piece, that's relevant to my background. I was, of course, like many people, a seeker, if that's not too cliched of a term. But what was available to me as a young man was kind of this, and I'm not saying it disparagingly. I'm speaking to the zeitgeist of my time. Was this kind of Dan Brown era occultism, Da Vinci Code kind of. So it didn't really, growing up as a kid in the suburbs of New York City, out on Long Island, it wasn't. I just kind of grew up normal, I didn't really, I didn't get involved in magical fraternities or societies or covens or anything. So what was available to me was from the mass media, and I consumed it, and I began keeping little journals where I would, you know, not annotate, but write my thoughts and notes from these books, and a whole host of subjects was covered through these books. Not just Dan Brown, but related literature. Clive Prince, Lynn Picknett, Henry Bagent, and Robert Lomas. A lot of these, Graham Hancock, a lot of these guys writing in that time and putting out this, I would say Masonic adjacent works of research. They were all very much in the same wheelhouse. They dealt with this stuff in a similar framework. And so that's what I was reared on, but it covered Freemasonry, talked a lot about Kabbalah, talked about alternative history, all of that kind of stuff. And then one day I was invited by my aunt to come over and help her remove some books because she had a tenant who was a very nice lady, but the lady, may she rest in peace, she threw herself in front of a train. And when my aunt went down into the apartment, which was in the basement, the finished basement level of her house, she realized that this lady was a hoarder. And she ended up having no next of kin. So there were just stacks and piles of books and journals wrapped in cellophane. And so she invited me over to to come and help her because you know, books are they're deceptively heavy when you put them in boxes and you're moving them around. So me and a buddy of mine went there to help her move all this stuff. And this one book caught my eye, and I still have it on my bookshelf. It was called The Oracle of Kabbalah by Richard Seidman. And I just said, I know this is weird, but do you mind if I take this? And she's like, sure. So I walk around my neighborhood and I read it in about a day. And it wasn't like revelatory in terms of me all of a sudden now having this clear exposition and understanding of Kabbalah, but something inside of me, a bell was ringing. I'm like, this is important. So I went on the internet, yellow or white pages. I'm dating myself now, but I typed in Long Island Kabbalah Study Group, and a gentleman's name and information came up. I reached out to him, and he said, "Oh, that group doesn't meet anymore, but there's this other thing." And that other thing ended up being the magical initiatory order, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And so I kind of wandered into that space, and for a while, I was reticent. I didn't really trust it. I thought, what are these people? They think you're doing like Harry Potter wand waving stuff. What is this? This is crazy. Um, but after kind of flaking on them, my life fell apart several years later, and something in my gut started to ring again, and you know, basically saying, "Look, you got to go back and go hat in hand and ask them to take you back." I didn't even really know why, but I did it. They gave me a second shot, and now I'm senior adept in the order, and I run one of the three chiefs of the North Carolina temple of the HOGD, and from there, you know, I moved from New York to Asheville, and from there, I joined Freemasonry. I joined Martinism, and several other initiatory lineages, and it's all practical. We're not no. These are societies. Maybe Freemasonry is a little bit more armchair in terms of esotericism, but certainly the Golden Dawn. Certainly, the other fraternities that I am, or societies, really, I'm a part of, orders. They're very much, you know, rubber to the road. Like, let's do this.
You write from this perspective, so it is not armchair and it's not a reiteration of other, it's a regurgitation, really. This is coming from an experiential space. And in that particular presentation, you talk about when you showed up, your friend had invited you and the picture book and all this. I loved the synchronicity of how this etheric magic book came to be. So moving ahead, and this is a conversation, not an interview, and I kind of bounce around, so I hope you can hang.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
There were things you said in there that I think are really important for the average person in the world to understand. And of course, this is always going to break down to language so that we can get on the same page, the etymology of language, including the lexicon of slang that's out there, and especially English, which is a living language. So the rules aren't hard set. It fluctuates, unlike the quote unquote dead languages. So aether and the aether and etheric and all this is such a wonderful concept. And in fact, my first band, that was the title, and I'm not going to say it here, but that was the very first word in it spelled properly. And I've had this relationship with this idea that is really the a being in and of itself, because it's what we breathe in. It's spiritus. And you really brought that in that presentation. I was really impressed. A lot of people skim over this idea. And I know when you get into a deep study, this stuff gets fleshed out, but in the general outer world, it's not fleshed out for a lot of people. So let's talk about aether and spiritus, the breath, breathing, breeze, respiration, breath of life, life force, how this brings in the anima and the different distinction between spirit and anima, that all is intertwined within this one word, really.
Well, there's a lot of different terminology to your point earlier, which is not, it's used generically in a modern context without parsing the etymology or really understanding it. Now, I happen to be lucky because I'm ethnically Greek, and my father was from Greece, and so I speak and can read Greek, and so I'm reading the words and knowing what they mean.
Yes.
Now you need to dive back a little bit, and you know, ancient Greek, you know, you need to really parse the meaning of it. So um, it's important to do that because the we get lost on the terms. And this is a problem, right? And again, it's to your point. When we engage in discourse on this stuff, we have a hard time communicating if we're from different communities or different quarters of the community, because I could be saying spirit, I could be saying soul, and thinking and meaning something completely different, right? A lot of people accuse uh, practitioners and people who use these terms, this language, accuse them of bandying about terms that are not well defined. And so my job here, this is another reason why I wanted to be very specific and thorough, is I'm going to define these things for you. Uh, and that context is going to tell us how they fit together, and it's going to demystify a lot. So the big sticking point at first is the differentiation between spirit and soul. Obviously, the word soul in Greek is psyche, which is the root of the word psychology. So there's your first definition, would be the soul is the sum totality of your interior experience, your thoughts, your emotions, your dreams, fears, appetites. If you're really good at math, that's a part of your soul, so on and so forth. It's just that the ancients believed that when the body died, this had continuity. So kind of a continuity of consciousness. That is soul. That is soul, especially to the ancient Greeks, the Greco-Egyptian tradition, the Hellenistic tradition, the Greco-Roman Egyptian tradition, from which a lot of this stuff comes. Uh, Spirit, on the other hand, would have corresponded to the Greek term pneuma or pneuma, right? That is, we know that we have things like, the when you say pneumatic, you know that it uses air, you know that it uses that kind of force. So this has to do with the breath, right? And it's not just the physical breath; it's the breath of the divine which permeates all of creation. Um, it's only very recently that we believed that space is a vacuum. As a matter of fact, if you read ancient documents, if you read older documents, like let's say the foundational pamphlets that form early Rosicrucianism, right? The Rosicrucian invisible fraternity. In their first manifesto, their first pamphlet, right, released in 1615 in Kassel, Germany, they it's called the Fama Fraternitatis, the fame of the fraternity, and they talk about they list several axioms or sayings, and one of them is in Latin "nequaquam vacuum," nowhere a void, nowhere a void. The universe is filled with the essence of the divine, and this corresponds to something as recent, comparatively, as say Nikola Tesla's luminiferous ether, right? So that this is the mechanism that is everywhere, that allows light to travel, allows heat to travel. I won't get too technical into how that is thought to work. That's in the book for anybody that's interested in this kind of stuff. But ultimately, that is what is meant when we talk about breath. But there's a relationship between ether and air, and the breath. As a matter of fact, anybody who's done pranayama or qigong, they all know about this. You have to synchronize your breathing. Chan meditation, right? That's another one. It's that's kind of the more Chinese way of rendering the term Zen, which ultimately comes from the Indian word jhana, right? So these are all part of a continuous tradition in the East, and that's really where I filled in the blanks, because when I initiated into the Golden Dawn, simultaneously I said, you know what? I need to rearrange my career here. I was also a traveling, touring musician, and then when I was home, when I wasn't on the road, I was working as a bartender. So I said, you got to get into a new career now. This is a new point in life. I ended up going for physiotherapy and Chinese medicine. Okay, and one of the, you're forced to take, not forced. I mean, I loved it, but you have to take for your degree. You have to take qigong. You have to take tai chi. You even have to take yoga. So I engaged in these practices, and as I learned more about meridian theory, Chinese medicine, qi theory, all of this stuff, I realized, oh my gosh, this is the other side of the coin. This stuff is so well systematized that I think I can bring this into my Western, ceremonial magic paradigm. So again, they're looking to see, are there any correlations or correspondences? Is there any way, any place that these words agree with each other? And of course there were, right? Ki, chi, prana, ruach, spiritus, all of these things mean breath and spirit, life, force, energy. Okay. Energy is a term we get stuck on. We have to use it because it's the only way we can conceptualize and talk about these things. Do I think ultimately that the ether is energy in the same way heat is energy, or any other kind of energy? I don't know. I don't think so. I regard it. I think a better way to define it is a radiant luminosity, uh, and I'm not bothered by people referring to energy. I mean, I did that in the book because I had to. But I think part of our understanding has to actually be, rather than taking these ancient words and terms and trying to shoehorn them, fit them into our modern kind of like um, empirical, scientific paradigm, and sort of reducing them from what they are into that. I think that we should meet them on their own terms. I think that we need to read these things, understand them etymologically, but also understand them within the context of the traditions and times in which they were written, because that's going to show us something very, very unique about them, and something very informative about them that is not readily apparent from the modern worldview. So that's, I was lucky. I was lucky that I got to study meridian theory and all of this cool, quote unquote, energetic stuff at the same time I was learning about Western ceremonial. But there you have it. You have this universal life force energy that is all permeating, almost a substratum of every kind of permutation, force and power you could think of, that is synonymous with atmosphere and the air we breathe, and then soul, on the other hand, being the the part of you which is interior, which is thoughtful, reminiscent, even imaginative, willful. It's all of those things, but we just conceive of them as not not needing the body to exist.
What is plasma?
Well, I don't rightly know how I would fit that into a metaphysical system. Certainly, we could regard it as, let's say, like a fifth element, so to speak. I'm not talking about the periodic table of elements, um, but I um, I find that occasionally when I will read about it, I'll see people saying, "Okay, yeah, it's earth, air, fire, water, and plasma are kind of the more um, modern grouping that seeks to meet halfway the ancient theory of the elements." But I don't necessarily, I would conceive of that as a type of fire. If we're talking about it in terms of ancient elemental theory, or even just medieval or Renaissance elemental theory, I would see that as another type of fire. Of course, if you read something like Agrippa, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, who wrote like a textbook on Western magic called The Three Books of Occult Philosophy, in the 15th century, again in Germany. But he writes about the different forms of fire. That there is terrestrial fire, which is dark and ruddy, volcanic, almost like uh, metallurgic, right? And gives off ruddy smoke. And then he says that there's celestial fire, which is much more refined, and you can tell the difference, right? If you look at a campfire, it's going to be letting off some smoke. It's going to be orange red. It's going to be rust colored and give off that kind of flickering light. If you look at the light of the sun, I mean, that's scintillating white light, and it's a different kind of fire that he regards, because there's heat in that as well. And then he talks about how these things are ultimately um, physical, phenomenal expressions of the divine light, the divine fire, which is not necessarily technically conceived of as an actual substance, but certainly synonymous with the mind of the divine and its the outpouring of its essence. And so, in that way, we actually see it kind of scale down, and we see this chain of flow of divine light and effluence and divine mind pouring down through the stars and planets and then arriving here in its most dense manifestation in terms of things like volcanic fire, material fire, so on and so forth. And I would probably classify plasma then, if we're talking about the physical substance, as a type of fire.
There's a lot that could be said, but I like how you distinguish here in that. And then also look at the idea of etheric sight is something I think that gets a lot of play, but I think some people that don't have a concept of some of these things get confused by this.
Yeah, yeah. And again, that's another reason why I tried to put this stuff together is once you get it, you got it. It's not
Yes.
it's I'm not saying that it's easy, but it's simpler than most people think. And so here's the reason why I won't commit to considering ether energy the way we might think of like electricity or something like that, or but there's certainly a physical component to it. So if we think of and some of this language may be familiar to your audience, and if not, I explain it in the book. But if we think of the aspects of our being, we said the soul was the interior, non-physical part, right? The ancients didn't believe that the soul, that the mind was an emergent property. They believed that intelligence, intellect, consciousness was fundamentally independent of the physical organ of the brain, what have you. So that right there, that's on a different. It's tied to the body, but it effectively comes from and represents a different plane of reality. Okay, and many have called this at least the imaginative capacity within the soul, right? We in magic we consider the imaginal, that image making faculty of the mind. We consider that a power of the soul. It's not necessarily fantasy. In fact, it's an organ of spiritual perception when used rightly. So that could be conceived of as what many writers, such as the Theosophists and Golden Dawn writers, and people like Dion Fortune, Israel Regardie, Aleister Crowley. Just for the record, I'm not a big Crowley fan myself. I really have a strong distaste for the man, but I understand that his work is so diffuse that inevitably people will reference it. So we talk about this imaginal capacity as the astral. Now you've got the astral and you've got the physical. And there's this relationship to them. There's this middle piece that links them like three rings. And that middle piece is the etheric. So it's of a physical nature, but it's extremely rarefied. It doesn't, it doesn't conform to our ideas about energy. And I mean, frankly, and I note this in the book, the scientific definition, the official definition of energy doesn't tell us anything about it, right? The official definition is the ability to do work. It tells me nothing about what energy is inherently. But there's definitely a physical component that links it to the imaginative. And in this way, this is where people say, things that hang-ups that you have, grudges that you hold, things you can't let go of, fears can create physical ailments over time. You know, the ether explains that link from the soul to the body, and because it is at least in part physical, even if its roots are in the non-physical or superphysical. So, because there is a physical component to it, you can see it. However, you cannot see it, at least not at first, typically utilizing the same type of sight that you have used your entire life, which is basically, focusing the aperture of your eye, focusing the retina on discrete objects to see them and to, you know, understand how far they are from you and get your depth perception and proprioception. I have to look at my cup of coffee to grab it and securely reach it and to know where it is. That's not the type of sight that you want to use for etheric sight. It's not a contraction of sight, it's an expansion. So you're going to relax that aperture and you're going to gaze. You're going to relax the vision. I don't like to say stare. Staring implies that kind of like this, almost like I may doze off sort of thing. So you don't want to do that, but you certainly want to utilize that softened gaze that is not focused on anything. This is very difficult to do. Uh, and then what I would do, and again, I talk about this more in the book, is I start with your hand and hold it out, from your face as far as it can go. But the background that you need, should be of a solid color. So if you have a white wall, or even a black wall, or right now I have this kind of like burgundy wall in my library, and so it's a solid color though. So I want to place the hand maybe a foot or two away from that wall, and be standing with my arm outstretched and my palm kind of vertical, and almost like I'm giving a blessing to somebody. And you want to leave a little space in between your fingers, and then just gaze, project that gaze in between the fingers, relax the eyes, and then you'll begin to see this little sliver, this little haze. Now, what's going to happen is the first time that you see that, your eyes are going to sort of habitually focus, and you're going to lose it. Now, over time,